Hello and welcome to Premodern Elves. Before we get into the video, please do like, comment and subscribe. It means a lot and it really helps out the channel, so thank you for that. Now, elves are known as mana creatures, and that's exactly what this deck does. It generates huge amounts of mana. Priest of Titania especially can generate so much mana when you have a board full of elves, especially when combined with some of the other cards in the deck, such as Wirewood Symbiote or Quirion Ranger. Both of these cards look like they have a drawback, but actually this deck turns it into an advantage. For example, Quirion Ranger makes us return a land, but if we don't have a land to play for turn, then that means we can just use it, return it, play it again, and it gives us extra value. We can also abuse comes into play effects with Wirewood Symbiote. For example, Multani's Acolyte will draw us a card when it comes into play. If we have a symbiote, we can actually draw 3 cards a turn because we can use these abilities on our opponent's turn too. They're also especially broken because the creatures can use them even if they came into play that turn. And that brings us to the whole engine of the deck. So at its core, this is a survival of the fittest deck, meaning we're playing lots of toolbox cards. Usually the first thing we'll go for is Squee Goblin the Bob. That gives us a creature that we can discard every turn and gives us extra value. But at some point we'll also want to get Anger. This gives all of our creatures haste and is just generally insane when combined with mana creatures. So for our toolbox we have a lot of different creatures. Here are a few examples. Nantuko Vigilante is kind of like a naturalized disenchant effect. Well-Wisher can gain us life. Yavimaya Granger can help find a basic land, usually the mountain that we need for Anger. And Caller of the Claw is excellent against sweepers or just removal or combat or things dying in general. So once we've generated all of this mana, we need something to use it with, and that is where Mastercore comes in. It's perfect against creature decks. It can just machine gun down all of their stuff, and often it can lock them out of the game, as soon as they play a creature, we can just instantly kill it. So that will give us the win in a lot of creature matchups. Otherwise, we could also get Kamal Fist of Crozer. This can help to pump all of our creatures and just smash in for loads of damage straight away. Although one of the most common options that this deck usually goes for is Deranged Hermit, and in fact this is a 2-of in this deck instead of a 1-of. So this puts down 9 power for 5 mana, which is obviously a very good rate, especially when combined with Anger in the graveyard, giving them all haste. This can very often end the game in 1 or 2 turns, and it's just an excellent card. Also, because it's an elf, there's the chance for additional craziness, as we can return it to our hand with Wirewood Symbiote and just keep playing it to generate more and more tokens. Now, mono green decks usually don't have too many choices for disruption, but we are generally playing for Tanglewire. And Tanglewire is incredible in this deck, not only because we're spewing out loads of creatures and things that it can tap, but also because many of those cards don't need to be untapped to use their abilities. For example, Wirewood Symbiote or Quirion Ranger. We're also playing 4 copies of the iconic Gaia's Cradle. This card is absolutely incredible, and it can very commonly add 3, 5, 10 plus mana depending on what we have in play and the situation. It's just such a strong card. Otherwise, we're basically a mono green deck at heart, so we just have forests and fetch lands, but we are playing 4 of the red-green fetch land. That's because we need a mountain in play for Anger to give everything haste when it's in the graveyard. If we don't have the mountain, our creatures won't have haste. But don't worry, we also have the tutorable Yavimaya Granger that can get the mountain. For options, we have Tribal Force Mage and Elvish Champion to pump our guys and give them a kind of pseudo evasion. We also have Birchlaw Rangers as a kind of pseudo haste way to tap our guys for mana. I've also seen some lists play Biorhythm, which is of course excellent against those non-creature decks, but I will say that Elves tends to be a quite stock list these days, and it's not that often that you see the lists deviate from the norm. But, of course, as I always say, just play whatever makes you happy, play the cards that you think are fun. For the sideboard, you have all the cards you'd expect, such as Naturalize for artifacts and enchantments, something for against graveyards like Tormod's Crypt. You might see something like Winter Orb for against control decks, and Null Rod for against artifact decks, but as this is a toolbox deck, we do have a lot of 1-of and 2-of toolbox kind of creatures. There's too many to list here, but some of the more common ones include Genesis to get stuff back from the graveyard in those kind of grindy matchups. We'd also have something like Goblin Sharpshooter for the mirror and creature decks, Elvish Champion for against forest decks, and more copies of Caller of the Claw against decks that have lots and lots of removal. So Elves is one of those critical mass kind of decks where we're trying to assemble a bunch of pieces on the board, and then those will just give us a huge, enormous advantage. These are some of the key cards to the deck. When you're playing the deck, these are the cards you're looking for, and when you're playing against the deck, usually you want to kill all of these straight away if you can. When using survival, it's pretty common to go for squee first, and then cycle through an anger before getting the thing you want, but it's not always the case. It really does depend on the matchup and how much pressure you're under. So this deck does obviously like having a survival in play, but don't worry, there are other ways to generate value, such as these two cards as we mentioned before. This can help you to draw 3 cards a turn, because remember, you can use the effect in your opponent's turn as well. Starting hands that we would love are ones that can accelerate our survival. Start off by putting some mana guys into play, and then around turn 3 or 4 just really start going crazy. And the endgame card that we'll want, it really does depend on the matchup and the situation we're in. As a toolbox deck, we really do have a lot of options at our disposal all of the time, so you just have to judge the matchup and the situation at hand. And when playing against the deck, of course, removal is key, especially cards like Sweepers, or there's some absolutely brutal enchantments like Humility or Engineered Plague, but it can just work by killing off their key creatures in some decks that have a lot of removal. Anything such as repeated removal, like a Goblin Sharpshooter or a Masticore, is obviously brilliant, and there's some cards like Cursed Totem that shut down creatures. I also usually like to bring in disenchant effects, because you really do want to take out those survivals as soon as you can. Elves is a kind of aggro combo deck. It can play this kind of value, beatdown kind of strategy, or it can just combo you out from nowhere. It really does depend on the matchup and what's going on, so it won't always play the same way. And the strengths of this deck, it is dubbed as the best deck or public enemy of the format, because it's incredibly powerful, resilient, and it really can win from nowhere and just start churning through its deck like crazy. The weaknesses, apart from being super expensive to build, it's public enemy number 1, so everyone's bringing hate cards for you. Some of those hate cards are brutal. You do need planning and math skills to really work out how much mana you've got and what you're going to be doing. And it does rely on key cards. If you draw just only your mana guys, then sometimes it can kind of just stall out, and then they can combo off or they can win before you can do your thing. So here's an example list, but of course, as always, I do recommend checking out TC decks. There are so many Elves decks on there. It's one of the more popular decks in the format. And if you did like this video, please do like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for watching. See you next time.